My experience reading through the Rewind or Die novella horror series during October. So last October, I read both Transmuted by Eve Harms and Benny the Cannibal King by Hailey Piper, and they both hail from this Rewind or Die horror anthology series you can find on Amazon, and even better yet, it's on Kindle Unlimited. And I think I gave both of them 4 or 5 stars. I really had a great time, and I thought what better way to get into like a Halloween spooky season kind of vibe than to read the whole series this year. And as future Jess, who's actually read as much of the Rewind or Die series that I could manage in October, I just have to say I was so confident thinking I could read 43 books even if they were novellas within a month. At this rate, I'd have to do 4 Rewind or Die Halloween features before I could finish the series. So instead of talking about the whole thing, I will be talking about the first 9 books today. Starting with Midnight Exhibit Volume 1 by Eddie Generous, Stephen Graham Jones, Rene Miller, and Philip Francisi. My first question was, is there a volume 2? And the answer is yes, it's further on into the anthology, but I didn't get that far. So I am wondering if this Midnight Exhibit element is like a wrapper for the rest of the stories in the anthology. But as of 9 books in, there's no connecting threads I can think of that would like be able to tie this together aptly. And the chaos writer in me loves the fact that we started off this off with an anthology in and of itself, because it's a story about a man and a woman who got into a car accident with a very odd tow truck driver who happens to show up and give them a ride. As they travel someplace, the tow truck driver ends up telling these other stories that are wrapped into this first installment in the anthology. I don't know why, but for some reason that just tickles my sense of humor. As an intro to the Rewind or Die anthology though, it is pretty flat. I'm wondering if I make it all the way to volume 20 if it's gonna make sense or tie together in some kind of meaningful way. Even as a wrapper within itself, the individual stories it's telling by different authors don't connect very well to what's going on in the larger world, so it feels really random. That's not to say that some of the stories aren't good, it's just to say like the man and the woman getting a ride by the tow truck driver doesn't really play back into these 3 stories or like what happens to them at the end. I don't have much to say about the outer story here with the man, the woman, and the tow truck driver. There's some decent imagery. It seems like the husband is the more awful of the 2 people. The tow truck driver seems morally neutral, although he is horrific to look at. That part to me is like a shoulder shrug, but looking at each story the tow truck driver tells, we'll start with Stephen Graham Jones, which FYI, I love that he's been included right at the top of this anthology because it's like a pretty big horror name to kind of try and draw people into it. And I really believe that not enough people have read these books. They're a lot of fun, they're short, there's quite a few well-known authors included in the anthology, and they're very like quick little tastes of them. And I feel like most of these stories have a lot of passion in them, which is not something I can say about most of the Amazon original shorts that you see me reviewing on this channel. But as far as like this specific installment from Stephen Graham Jones goes, I feel like this is one of his lesser short stories. You can see quite a few of his like reoccurring themes, like where the story actually takes place in a high school, and in that regard the kids in the high school as well as like the high school life as portrayed feels very similar to something you get in Final Last Girl. It's not played very seriously, it's sort of like a shoulder shruggy lark kind of game sort of vibe. There is this one cutesy element that I enjoyed where they have like a fortune teller, and this fortune teller is the magical MacGuffin that makes the kids disappear. And at the end, when the kid is like experiencing the traumatic climactic moment, he's like sort of explaining how they need 4 players, like you need 4 fingers to do the fortune teller, and how this fortune teller like goes through time and space and does these things. That was very reminiscent of Stephen Graham Jones' Trespass Collection installment, but he doesn't quite connect it all as well as it happens in that book, because he sort of drops some of the fortune teller elements and the game playing elements and just sort of leaves it as like a weird teens limbo kind of moment where like they're playing spin the bottle, they're not playing with the fortune teller. The fortune teller doesn't seem to want to do anything with their energies or essence or souls or whatever. He's got like some good graphic imagery about the teens in different state of decomposition, still functioning and stuff, and like the newest member who hasn't started to decompose yet being kind of creeped out. There are great individual moments in it, but it doesn't tie together or leave like a lasting memory all on its own. I'd probably rate this one very similar to the Elvis Enclosed Room short story I read back in January. Like, it's doing a lot of things that in theory I should like, and I can recognize individual great moments, but it's not coming together in a way that I'm enjoying or like feeling any connection to. Next is Rene Miller's story, and I'm giving that 5 stars because it's sort of like a rape revenge story, and I'm always in on those. That said, the story does have a bunch of elements that don't make sense and a litany of imperfections. Starting with this one line the female character gives to the man right before they go into an essay scene where she says, "Stay out of the darkness." It gets repeated a couple of times in a few different contexts, and I never understand what she means by that warning. Like, is she aware that she's about to be essayed and this is him like going into a dark side of himself? The way his character is portrayed, it feels like he might be darkness itself. Like, she's not the first person he's done this to, and he like beats his wife, and there's some other things going on that make it seem like he's just the darkness, period, in all shapes and forms. But if we're just talking about like actually staying out of shadows or staying out of nighttime, being in artificial light all the time, we don't really play with that aspect either, like if you take it more literally. And I kind of wish we had, you know, that there had been like monsters or timeline or something else that had like woven us in and out of these different versions of the universe. Possibly even like stay out of darkness, meaning stay awake, stay conscious. That could have been really cool. They come very close to making that like a connective thread throughout the different alternative worlds, but it's not quite there. And I just wish we had a little bit more meat on the bone if we're going to keep re-emphasizing this one line. It's also pretty unclear whether or not we're weaving in and out of alternate timelines or dream worlds, or if he really like is going into a coma and waking up 7 years later, if there's something magical going on or scientific going on, because it's possible there's just new science that's been discovered or introduced if he's been in a coma for 7 years and that's what's going on. But it is equally possible that this is some kind of like supernatural magical thing that she knew he'd kick off if he continued to pursue her like this. And depending on whether or not like the revolution happened in our world or whatever, some of the outcomes there just don't make sense or lead to more questions. That said, the different horrific things this guy experiences and the allegory you could make to like everyday what happens to a lot of women was interesting and satisfying to see karma like sort of playing back on itself in him in different various ways. And that moves us into the Philip Fracassi story. This is a 4-star read in quality of writing and overall concept, but it misses the mark in execution to me because it is a short story, and this is the kind of thing that has the potential to be a full novel with a lot of meat on the bone. It's got a great beginning, it takes an obvious turn, and it builds it in a way that feels menacing and tense. I think personally I would have preferred if they had completed this turn 100%. The premise here is a wife who is dissatisfied with her husband. Somehow the husband has a second self growing on the back of his head. She falls in love with that second self and eventually murders the front-facing husband so the second self can take over completely. And then after that period, she realizes that she has a second self growing on the back of her head, and eventually her like new husband is gonna murder her so that her second self can take over. And we close with her just being like afraid. I would have liked to see that arc carry all the way through, because when the first husband gets murdered, he has no idea about the second self, the second body, what's going on with his own body. He just really trusts, loves his wife. So like her ability to help murder him so the second self can take over is very easy, kind of like streamlined, and he's just unaware of the whole thing until the very end. But where she is aware beforehand, it would be interesting to see if she can hear the second self, if she can feel the second self, if she can take steps to like avoid this grim end. More about the transformation and the gruesome moment of transformation that would have really made this like engaging and taken it to a next level of horror. And that moves us into the second book, which is Infested by Gore. It's near perfect to me. It's like a 4.5 star read. A little stingy, I feel like, with that star rating, but there are like some very dark, heavy elements that kind of just fall into your lap in this story, kind of out of nowhere, and not related to the main premise. Like, don't get me wrong, they're wrapped into the storytelling, they're there for a reason. A little bit, I feel like some of these elements of essay and assault and getting away with crimes and stuff like that exist in the narrative narrative to make it darker and to create like more shock. But I have to say, it kind of turned me off to certain elements of the story. I'm probably gonna get into spoilers at this point in the time, but we're following a empathetic female lead who's kind of like a park ranger in a private park service. It's somewhere in the south and it's swampy. I think they might mention where, but I don't remember now and I didn't take note. She has like a traumatic relationship with her family. Her father chose to end his life when she was 11 and she doesn't really know why, but it created this rift in her family where her mother has been using substances to deal with this, and her brother is just a bad, disturbed guy. And we get like lots of reasoning for this throughout the story, but the point is like her older brother, if there is something else going on, he knows and won't tell her, and her mom's not capable. She sort of feels like there's a secret around her father's death that either no one knows or people know and aren't telling her, and that's upsetting. So while she's not close to her family, she's very passionate about her job. She really loves the swamp, and there's this guy there who is helping them get rid of the mosquito population without chemicals by releasing sterile mosquitoes into the population so that they can't reproduce. She kind of has a crush on him because they both value ecology and nature, and they're both kind of like quieter and more bookish, and everyone else around them is kind of like a thug. And as all of this like family drama is going on, that's when these like bugs that are larger than life and are very aggressive and dangerous start coming out of the swamp, and it's sort of like them trying to figure out how they mutated, why, and surviving, because there's a bunch of really gruesome, gory, horrifying, terrifying kills. Everything you'd expect, like when a bug starts to become larger in size, closer to a dog or even a person in some cases, graphic, gross gore. Like if you're there for that element, it is horrifying, it's gory, it's gross. I loved that part. I thought it nailed the extreme horror on that end, those descriptions, those viscera, and it's really like hammering home this great point about how powerful and terrifying bugs are at the inherent brutality in nature. Like I think we often go out to nature because it's calm and it's peaceful and it's this yearning to go back to something simpler, but nature is brutal and disgusting and heartless and without remorse as well. And just seeing how the bug world interacts on a day-to-day basis, like in its small microcosm, but having that horror happen to people is a great way to drive that home. But I want to say around the 65-ish, 70-ish% mark, we come to find out that our main protagonist's brother lured that nerdy science dude's sister into the swamp where he assaulted and murdered her. And the brother got off of that because her father was a big shot lawyer and he wrote into the judge to get him pardoned, which is something he did for the sake of his son, but he couldn't live with the guilt of doing that. And then the son has been living with the guilt of being responsible for his father's murder, and also like I guess the guilt of assaulting and murdering this peer of his. The story goes out of its way to make it seem like this was a tragic event that he regrets and is sorry for. They talk about exactly how graphic it was and exactly what he did, and it's a lot. From that regard, I don't know that someone who can do that at a young age can feel feeling like that. If you could feel sorry or recognize your harm or any of those kinds of things, I just don't see how you could do that from the start. And perhaps it's intended in this story, but when we get to this point where we realize this horrific thing this brother did, and that this scientist guy is here for revenge on the brother and the town, there's just like this huge sense of betrayal for me as a reader. And not necessarily betrayal against the mom and the brother who know all of this and have been keeping it secret. To me, it was more in the same line that the father had portrayed the protagonist by choosing to protect the brother, by choosing to keep something that would affect her quiet, and then killing himself and like leaving her with no resolution. The protagonist was now kind of like betraying me as the reader, because she's like repulsed and sick by what her brother did, and perhaps by like what her father and mother had done to aid and abet him, but not enough in my opinion, since like a large part of the back of the book is her going to try and save him from himself and like give him an opportunity for redemption, which is all the this family has done this boy's whole flippin' life is give him a chance for redemption, thinking about him and how he feels and how he thinks, and not thinking about like that dead girl, about the father who couldn't live with that guilt, like about that girl's brother and family. Like nobody ever cares about them or thinks about what they need. It's always about him. And you know, to be fair to this protagonist, has to make a quick flip decision about whether she goes in and tries to save him or leaves him for dead. And there's no taking this choice back. It either is happening or it's not. And she goes to save him. And I guess she feels like she can probably have it out about the other stuff later. It's probably not a conscious choice where she chooses him over her and her mother's safety. But I just hated it and felt really betrayed and awful about the whole thing. And part of me like is just 100% on this other guy's side, even though he's crazy and deranged. Like he spent all this time genetically engineering bugs, pretending to be from the state so he could plant these bugs, and then like he's enjoying watching just random town people get ravaged because a group of higher ups within it chased him and his family out and treated his sister and her case like it was nothing. And I suppose part of the issue too is that I just don't think the brother going back into the swamp is him showing that he has remorse and like giving him the right to redemption. That's not it for me. I'm a bit conflicted about the villain too. Certainly he went there knowing that he was going to murder everyone in that town. And then he decided to have a love affair with someone who's related to his sister's murderer. And maybe he was surprised to find out that she was kind and caring and empathetic. But instead of that, like waking him up and realizing there are probably other people innocent in the town, it just like made him obsessed with her. And I feel like he had this weird relationship where he like loved her as a romantic relationship, but also loved her like a replacement sister. And that was like incestuous and gross and conflicting. And it sucks too, like from her perspective, because the only person who's ever cared about her safety or well-being and is like trying to get her out of the town and protect her is the same person who created this situation from the get-go. Overall, I'd say Infested brings a bunch of horror and terror, very satisfying kills, and an overall arcing feeling of ennui and unrest when you're done. But I think I personally would have just preferred if it had been a simpler bug horror without some of those more graphic assault human elements sort of like woven into it, complicating things. Next is Benny Rose, The Cannibal King by Hailey Piper. I read this last year, so I didn't reread it this year. It is a story about like a magical slasher killer who rises every Halloween, whose name is Benny Rose. He's got like his own urban legend in the town with a bunch of mixed stories, mixed ways that they could defeat him or survive him. It's an excellent short little Halloween read. It's very atmospheric. It's got like this great like Scream Queen slasher element involved in it. It's got like some together girl power sort of stuff. It has a humorous element about the old people in the like community there. It's doing a lot in a very little amount of space, and it's tense and thrilling and uplifting and life affirming at the end, as well as having like some horrific, scary, gory kills. And next is Cirque, Berserk by Jessica Guess. This is another easy 5-star. I really loved it. I think it's got some great horror elements, as it's got these like Satanists who come back every year and have to kill these people so that they can keep living forever in some kind of weird immortality loop. And that's always fun. It's got like those fun slasher elements. It's got a fun carnival vibe, and it's like a broken down carnival vibe coming back to life. It's got those great clueless high school teens, hopeful, life is just starting and now they have to live through this horrific thing kind of moment. Got a couple of different people you're rooting for. It's told from a few different perspectives, and those people's perspectives are very well established, even if they're going to end up being early on the kill list. And I will say we get a lot of perspective from the actual killers as well as the victims. There's some back and forth perspective in time, explaining how these Satanists got started, what drove them to this, why they keep doing it, and like the relationships within the group. Aside from being a fun slasher, I also think this is like peak dark romance for me. There's a relationship between two of the Satanist people, and their relationship is really romantic and has you rooting for them them, and it has like the warm fuzzy feelings, and it's like a good healthy relationship, even though all the stuff they're doing like to sustain themselves and their friends is sort of horrific. And it asks like those fun questions like, how far would you go to protect your friends and family? What would you do to live forever? Oh no, these high school kids are dying and they had their whole lives ahead of them, and some of them were going to do great things, and some of them were probably going to be mediocre and find themselves later in lives and just be normal. And then there's like these Satanist killers who are sort of living like a sad half life, but it is immortal, and in some ways it is better than what they had while they were still alive for realsies. And this brings me into Hairspray and Switchblades by V. Castro. I was really looking forward to this because V. Castro released a book earlier this year that I was super interested in reading. And I thought this was going to be like a fun little taste of her. And also there's just a ton of elements in this story that appeal to me. They've got jaguar shifters, we have strong independent women, we have people going against the grain of society and maintaining their self-respect and their self-worth despite what society says to them. We have this creepy, weird witch woman and like a bunch of really dark spells. There's a bunch of great body horror, both in like the shift from human to jaguar, but also in like this witch woman who's like taking pieces from people and sewing them together and making weird dolls and stuff. Great atmospheric things. The overall plot itself is something that should have appealed to me, does in concept. As far as execution goes, it was very strange to me. The whole time I was reading it, I wanted to stop reading. I was done with it, I was over it, and I can't even tell you what I didn't like. I mean, I enjoyed the characters. I think the main character, Maya, is great. I think the younger sister she has is a perfect balance of like needing assistance and stepping up and taking control of things. She's not, you know, an annoying younger sister or like a helpless younger sister. In fact, even though she can't shift, she gets her own kind of like moment to shine, just being herself and being human. I love the other shifters that come in and sort of try to help save the day, and I like a secret shifter organization working together to like live in harmony with people on the down low. I love the witch. I love her empathetic origin to this horrific monster transformation she's done. You know, all of it should be working really well, and for some reason I just didn't have a good time reading it. I ended up rating it 3 stars because there is so much great stuff in it, even though for whatever reasons it wasn't right for me at this time. Which rolls me into Soul Survivor by Zachary Ashford. This was fine. It's like a monster slasher movie, and the thing that Ashford is doing to try and make it feel like a higher concept is he's telling it like a reality survivor show, and in that way he's telling it very quickly from different perspectives and giving like each person their own narrative story arc like you'd see in reality TV. This didn't work for me because I didn't think the characters were different enough. In fact, there were ones that I kept getting confused with each other all the time. You know, they had distinct character traits, but since all of them sort of acted the same, like were relatively awful to each other, were self-interested and a little bit pathetic, it was hard to make any one of them stand out or have a distinctive, definitive voice. Works in reality TV because when you get a different person's perspective, you get their face on screen, and usually they make sure they look different enough so that you can identify who they are and have like a face and a name together. But without the physical face element, this sort of storytelling is very confusing and a little bit jarring for me. And I think the real horror here is like some of the blatant sexism, misogyny, and transphobia slash homophobia that we have to experience in this small slice of life drama reality moment. There's one character, Robin, and she has a mohawk and wears cargo pants. And because of this, people assume that she is a lesbian or that she wants to be a man but isn't a man. And they make a lot of mean, cruel jokes and jabs at her on this account, like her trying too hard. And it's all presumptuous. I think at the end, Robin does say that she prefers women, which is fine. Like, whatever that character is fine. But like the way they just leap to assuming because she has a mohawk and wears cargo pants, she wants to be a man and is trans is really weird and off-putting to me. And I think too, it was like a little bit triggering because you wouldn't know it now since I have such long long hair, but I spent probably a good like 6 or 7 years with a pixie cut, and I would get a lot of similar comments, and it's very scary to have men come up to you and like imply that you want to be a man and you can't be them, and that like if you just got like with the right man at the right time, they would show you what it was about and change you. All that's very scary and off-putting, and it comes up casually in conversation in a way that you would be surprised. I know that I was consistently surprised by who would say what to me and when, and I loved that pixie cut. It just had to do with how I liked to look. If we're talking about the actual creature itself, the way it attacks, the gore we get, the way it picks certain people off and when, the running, chasing scenes, all that stuff is good. That's why I think I ended up giving it 3 stars. It doesn't mean more than that. I don't think it gives you the same nature's brutal kind of messaging that you get from like bugs, because this is like an imaginary creature, and to a certain degree its level of hostility to humans feels odd since there's plenty of fish and that's what it naturally eats like when it's on this deserted island. I think too there are just too many things that took me out of the story. Like the idea is that they were a reality TV show and they were gonna go play a survivor game on an island, but their plane had issues and they all had to parachute out of the plane, and that's how they ended up on this island. And secretly the game had started now when they parachuted to this island. Why do they have parachutes for everyone on the plane? And the other thing is the pilot hurt themselves while escaping the plane crash, and the pilot the most experienced using a parachute. So I would have expected more of the contestants to be injured the same way he was, or worse. The fact that all of them seem to be able to safely parachute down except for him makes no sense. And then the fact that they would have this whole place cameraed up and they'd only have one guy there watching the cameras. No, you'd have like a crew of like 3 or 4 people getting different moments and stuff and trying to initiate different things on the island. If you've gone to all this trouble, the fact that you just have one guy playing the indigenous population doesn't make any sense, and tranquilizing the people also doesn't feel like a thing that would make sense on a TV show. The whole concept is really weird, especially when you think about how awful people are on shows like Big Brother and stuff where they know there are cameras on them all the time. You don't need to go to like this elaborate trapped scenario to get good reality TV and people being heinous on camera. There is a guy from the military who has a whole Lord of the Flies loss of reality moment while on the island, and he becomes almost as much of an antagonist as these drop bears are, and his like spin out from connection to reality happens very quickly and in a way that doesn't make sense to me. And as a result, I sort of lose connection with him as a character and like sort of checked out of a lot of the things that was happening because he was chasing them and trying to kill everyone. I think it'd be a fun summer horror read. The lost on an island, find a creature that's hunting and killing you element is strong, and if you like that kind of story, this one's probably for you. Which moves me on to Food Fright by Nico Bell. This story's fine. I don't think it does anything to stand out as like a horror slasher. Set in a high school, some teen girls are hazing this other girl. Things go horribly wrong, not really because of them, but they're present, and the girl they were gonna haze gets murdered in a very graphic way. And then she like goes on to possess the home ec oven that killed her and try to get revenge on these other girls. The home ec oven part does make it kind of fun because there's all these like food related kills and like bakery pastry kind of monsters that come into play, and that's like fun and silly and creative, and there's something interesting at play where the monster itself is scary but it smells and or tastes really good, so there's like this combo of like I'm dying and I'm scared and like ooh this is delicious that I think is fun. This is all like combined and explained with a witch element, and I think the whole story would have done better without the witches. The way they introduced the witches to me was really jarring. I couldn't figure out if they were like in an alternate reality that just happened to share this one home ec class, or if they were in alternate timelines, or if this was happening at the same time. And once I finally realized that this was all one world, one place, same time, just different perspectives, I was thrown off by like the fact that witches exist, the fact that ghost hunters exist, but they do or don't know about witches, question mark. Are there fake witches and psychics like new agey people like we have, and also these people who are like more Harry Potter-esque? Lots of questions there. And that so many of the teachers are part of the coven, but not not all of the teachers, because it would have made sense, like, if the Coven had founded this high school and was, like, looking for talent and also, like, looking for day jobs where they all just kind of support each other and hang out together. Also, it would have made more sense to me if the principal had been the high priestess versus the soccer coach. And I don't know if the soccer coach being the high priestess was supposed to be a surprise reveal when we realized that I think it's Heather's mom is the high priestess, or if we were supposed to know that because we were supposed to know Heather's last name and connect it with the coach. But because I don't pay that good attention to names, especially last names, it did come as a surprise to me at the end. Didn't work. Like, I think we should have really focused in on these teen girls, their horror, their upset about what happened to their friend, their intention beforehand, how it had gone horribly wrong, all of the like creepy, horrible bakery stuff. Talking about the home ec teacher, she's just not relatable to me. And they try to make her relatable, and at the same time they try to make her kind of a bad, like, alcoholic spiraling out kind of person, and none of that really worked or connected or ever came into place for me. I'll also say the main character Cassie, we spend a long time with her, hearing her whole backstory, like her gone dad, her mom who's in jail, her granny who for whatever reasons is hardened and won't relate to her. These elements also don't really come into play or mean anything, even though we repeat them a lot. I think I would have really preferred if we focused in on Cassie, her school life, her relationship with Jamie, the things that shine in the story, and had cut a lot of this fat out that doesn't tie back into the main thrust. In a novella especially, I feel like it should be short and driving, and you should be really focusing on that totality where every element is related. And there's just a lot here that could have hit the cutting room floor and I think would have made this stronger. This moves us into Hell's Bells by Lisa Quigley. Thank God this one was here in the collection because finally we get like a return to form. I love everything about this story. It's a huge 5 stars. It's got a lot of unique, truly disturbing imagery, and I think stuff in particular that will appeal to the female audience in a way that horror doesn't usually play to as much. Not only because our main protagonists are female, but some of the horror that's being explored there I think is uniquely feminine. Not to say that men won't enjoy this too, the same way that women enjoy horror that's like more masculine, men could enjoy this. I love this obsession with music that our main character has. I love her really close female friendships. I love how she is like trying to keep this sisterhood and be supportive and stuff, and at the same time isn't sure how to do that when this one character keeps pulling against the grain and trying to break away from what like unites them and makes them great. I love how they can both have courage and self-confidence and insecurity all in the same story, and it all makes sense and flows together. I love that we focused on Freddie Mercury and his death, but our main character just calls him Freddy because it lets me think sometimes that it's like Freddy Krueger or that it's like Freddy Fazbear, and both of those give me such a huge chuckle. I liked this interpretation of the devil and of God and of religion and of accepting yourself and others around you. The writing style itself is really mesmerizing and kind of lured me in. I loved the ending because it's triumphant, but it's not like hand wavy, everything goes back to normal. Girl is still dealing with an element of loss. She still sacrificed something that she's never been able to find even close to parallels with before, and all of that like is heartwarming and crushing and bittersweet and like the right amount of give and take to make something really great. And then lastly we have The Kelping by Jan Stincomb. There's just too much going on here with a highly unsatisfying ending. It's like the literary equivalent of someone just throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping that some of it sticks. Everything is kind of like obfuscated by mysterious language and random tangents and a whole bunch of different people doing and saying different things, and you trying as the reader to make these pieces fit together into something cogent. But it really feels like they gave me a bunch of puzzle pieces from different puzzles and were like, make your own picture with it. There's this mini intro with like a guy who I guess is a misogynist. He's like visiting the city and trying to pick up chicks while he's there, but he's doing it in such a respectful way. He's going to bars, he's meeting up with women, he's exchanging numbers, they're agreeing to meet him at another time on the beach where it appears that they are sober, and then they're going for dinner and or a walk, and he's hoping they'll come back with him at night. None of that sounds like something bad. So the fact that he meets up with this woman, they lure him out into the ocean and destroy him is like, but but why? It's no longer a revenge thing, right? So then it becomes, is this a food thing? Is this an enjoyment thing? Do you just like to kill off men specifically for some reason? Like, it doesn't work. And then we get a hard jump cut into this guy who's a local versus a guy who's a visitor. So people are gonna like notice if he goes missing or something happens to him, and they're gonna know what happened in his hometown, which makes it so much easier to search for him. And he's married, where I think the other guy was single. And granted, this dude is like cheating on his wife, but at the same time, his wife knows that she's being cheated on. She knew when they were dating. She knew before they got married. She knew while they got married. She knew while they had their first kid. She knew while they had their second kid. And yes, she doesn't want him to cheat. But at the same time, it seems like something they're either working on and or she's low-key kind of fine with. It almost becomes like a mundane complaint you have about your significant other at this point. Like, oh, he never cleans the dishes. But at the same time, you keep living with him. In fact, you get married to him. In fact, you have kids with him. At some point in time, you have to just acknowledge that him cheating or not cheating is not a priority for you in your life. And for whatever reasons, you've made it work this way and are going to continue indefinitely making it work this way. How the guy is getting these hookups is very impersonal. It seems to be that he's fairly safe. It's a little bit weird to me that one of his rules is no hookups with men. Like, does that mean he's bisexual and would otherwise hook up with men? So just overall, I don't connect this guy's situation to the guy in the front who gets murdered, even though I think it's supposed to imply there's some sort of danger for him or comeuppance or payment about to happen. Cheating's wrong, but like this cosmic justice or whatever doesn't feel right for what is a personal affair that the two of them seem to be working out on their own. So then it doesn't really explain what happens. And he's very focused on this one encounter he had recently, like by the ocean, that was probably with a mermaid lady. But I don't know if that's what triggered this or not, if it was always going to happen because he was a cheater or not. His son has this weird encounter that may or may not have happened, or might just be like trauma that he has endured and this is how his brain processed it. I don't know if that has anything to do with it. Just a ton of pieces. They don't come together and tell a story. You don't really know why it's happening to this guy. He becomes the Mermaid King, right? And you think all of this is happening because he became the Mermaid King and he went through the Kelping. Except that the guy who won the year before him is the one who's officiating the ceremony, so this doesn't happen to everyone. Also, he's a local and he's watched this ceremony happen every year, and if these local dudes disappeared after the ceremony, then we would know, because there'd be like a list of missing people, and he specifically would probably know because that's always a family man who's well known in the town. And lastly, there's some lyrical writing and some alter perspective, like at the very end, and usually I'm a sucker for that kind of thing, like I'm a huge fan, but in this case I think it just further confuses what's already a really confusing mishmash story. I wish what had happened and why it had happened had been more clear, and I wish we had actually incorporated less and done something with what we chose. And believe it or not, those are all the stories I could get through in Rewind or Die this year. And if you're still looking for a couple things to fill out your Halloween scary itinerary list, I totally recommend picking up one of these books in the series and reading it for the night. I had a lot of fun reading these over the season, and I would totally be open to doing a part 2 and reading more of these next year and coming back to you with it. Let me know in those comments down below if you have any interest in something like that, or if there's some other kind of Halloween themed thing you'd want next year. And as always, keep reading.